lefties. But he's the first guy I'd go to from the Giants.
He had a sub 100 ISO against righties last year. He's never been that good against righties. Like he does, if he's somebody that when you talk about splits, he is better against lefties. But I agree that it's probably somewhere in the middle. Still better against lefties, but not that good against them and not that bad against righties. I don't know. Overall, I look at this lineup and I don't see a whole lot that's threatening. So when you bring Kershaw into focus here, what are you doing with him on DraftKings and FanDuel? Because even though there's only 2 games, you still have Garrett Cole and you still have Max Scherzer in contention.
So Alex has Kershaw as the second highest probability of being a top 2 pitcher on the slate, which I think I agree with. Or sorry, top 2 value, which I do agree with. He's third behind Scherzer and Cole in terms of top 2 score, which I think makes sense because Cole just comes with so much strikeout upside. But I think, a clear value on Kershaw here. If you can't, like in cash games, if you can't get to Scherzer and Cole, I think Kershaw very clearly is the guy that you go to for value. In tournaments, I'm perfectly fine going there too, but he is projected for the second highest ownership on DraftKings behind Scherzer. Probably going to be a little bit over-owned, but I think that, it's pitching's a little bit more predictable than hitting, so it's probably going to be more beneficial to pivot off of some popular hitters than to be getting away from a $7,700 Kershaw.
And it's pretty self-explanatory, but I'll point it out anyway since it's new this year. The reason we've got top 2 pitcher is because on DraftKings you got to play 2. If you look at FanDuel, you've got only top pitcher percentage. So being that you only need 1 on FanDuel, that doesn't matter if he's going to be top 2 or not. So yeah, Kershaw, what did you mention FanDuel top pitcher percentage?
I did not.
Yeah, 26%. Garrett Cole's at 28.9%. So pretty close, but the problem there is, no, I'll ask you this. If you're building a lineup, you're hand building a lineup, and you have Garrett Cole in there, and you can make a big difference in the rest of your lineup, saving $1,100 and going to Clayton Kershaw, would that be worth it to you given how good this matchup for Kershaw is? Or is Garrett Cole at only $1,100 more not worth getting away from to fit in an extra bat or 2?
I wouldn't be actively trying to do it, but I also wouldn't be too concerned if it happened because I think FanDuel scoring is a little bit more conducive for Kershaw as well. He doesn't come with the strikeout upside that Cole does, but you get going 6 innings, getting the win, all that stuff's weighted a little bit more on FanDuel. So I think that it's easier for a pitcher like Kershaw to just go have a good game and get rewarded for it. Whereas on DraftKings, you're at with their scoring, you're at a little bit more risk of Cole just putting up a score that Kershaw can't get to.
So on the strategy show, Josh made an argument that Johnny Cueto could be viable. Do you agree or not? Tell me why.
I do agree, and it has nothing to do with Cueto or the Dodgers because obviously it's a terrible matchup, and I don't think Cueto is on the same level as the other pitching on this slate.
I think you guys are going to have the same answer here, but go ahead.
Yeah, he's looking at the top stack tool for DraftKings right now where he's clearly more in play because you have to roster 2 pitchers. We have him projected for 7.5% ownership with a 16% chance of being a top 2 pitcher on the slate.
Yeah.
16% is low, but 7% ownership or 8% ownership when there's only 4 pitchers to choose from. We know there's just so much variance in baseball that it doesn't really, if you're talking tournaments and you're talking trying to separate from the field, the Dodgers are going to be the highest owned team. Cueto is the lowest owned pitcher. It gives you a very clear path to how you do well in the tournament.
Let's talk about that for a minute. Adam, you compared, I know if you've watched this show before, especially last year, you've heard this before, but you compared his, top pitcher percentage to his ownership. A lot of times we'll compare top stack probability or top stack potential to their ownership. How are you weighing one against each other and saying, hey, it's nothing to do with Cueto. It's nothing to do with the Dodgers or the Giants. It's to do with these 2 numbers right here. How do you put them together? Right.
So I think that when you're looking at the lineups that you want to play in tournaments, on one hand, you have your medium projections, which you want your lineups to project well. You obviously don't want to just play trash lineups, but it's important for me that at least some part of my lineup is going under-owned. And I think the easiest way there's a difference between low owned or high owned and under owned and over owned, which is, I think, is something that goes completely overlooked a lot of the time. You can't just look at the raw ownership number and decide if they are someone you should play or not. It's more important comparing it to what their range of outcomes is. And so when you look here at Cueto, the ownership percentage on him is obviously low, but if he only had a 5% chance of being a top 2 pitcher, then I still wouldn't be interested, even though it's low. But when you have a 16% chance there, it's telling you that it's a profitable spot to leverage. It's not saying that it's going to work out on this slate, but it's saying that if you could play this slate 1,000 times and Cueto is a stand that you take at this ownership, or at the projected ownership, then it should be a play that makes you money. And so I think that even though it is a terrible spot for Cueto and he's not as good a pitcher as Scherzer, Cole, or Kershaw, I think that the field realizes that and probably is going to overvalue median projections a little bit too much, which drives down his ownership.
Now, are you talking about one specific site?
DraftKings. FanDuel, it's a lot tougher there because you're only rostering the one pitcher. You still have that argument that you could make because he is 6,600. All the other pitchers are expensive, and he would let you get whatever.
Projected ownership is 1%.
Right. Yeah. The ownership is 1%. The top pitcher percentage is still 10%, which is a little bit higher than I was expecting to see. So yeah, you can make that same argument there. You have less room for error, like on DraftKings, because you can still boost your score with Scherzer or Cole. If Cueto is just kind of average at 5K, it's not the end of the world. It's going to make it really hard for you to win, but it's not the end of the world. On FanDuel, if Cueto has an average game and doesn't do anything particularly good, it's going to be really, really tough for you to catch up to the Scherzer or Cole lineups, assuming they do what they're projected to. So there's less margin for error on FanDuel, but again, that's also reflected in his 1% ownership.
If you mention this, just stop me. It'll be a common occurrence. First time in a while.
I thought you were going to do it on Sanchez earlier.
What'd you say?
I thought you were doing it on Sanchez earlier when you started talking about his framing, like right
and
after
then I pulled through. No. I heard you say everything about that. I was just reinforcing what you said.
Yeah. Once you
I got lucky.
I realized you were listening.
Yeah. So there's a lot of times you do it too. We all do it. So we'll be looking at numbers, trying to pull up like some stats, looking at a comment from somebody, and shit happens. But did you mention the fact that with Johnny Cueto, if you were to roster him, not only is his ownership low and his top pitcher probability higher than his ownership, but also that the most popular stack is going to be the Dodgers?
I mentioned it in passing. I didn't really emphasize it like I should. Like that's a pretty big way. Yeah, that's one thing too, and baseball is different than other sports. Like in basketball, you can just look at the chance of success versus the ownership, and that pretty much tells you what you need to know. In baseball, there's kind of two forms of leverage. For one, you have what we were just talking about with Cueto just being under-owned and you're getting a leg up on the field. But the other form is that when you have a situation like that and you can take the low-owned pitcher against the really popular stack or a low-owned stack against a really popular pitcher, you're giving yourself like kind of like a path of least resistance where if Cueto does really well, not only do you benefit because you have a pitcher doing well, but you also benefit because 35% or so of the field just had a stack not do well.
Right. Yeah, you're right. There's two different points of leverage, whereas in basketball, you're not really winning. Just because somebody else has a different player, a different team, doesn't mean that you can block that in a way. So, yeah, those are important things to point out in baseball. It's totally different. And on a small slate like this, it's definitely a conversation we have to have. Even if you vehemently disagree with us, right? If you're watching the show and you say, there's no way I would consider Cueto, just understand the reasoning behind it. Doesn't mean you have to play him. It just means that, according to Alex or Awesemo's numbers, he has higher chance of being a top 2 pitcher, probably pretty much double than his ownership. They might have just updated that, but I did want to take one more look at ownership because I thought we just updated it. Let me see if we just updated ownership. Yep. Okay. 6 minutes ago. So Clayton Kershaw on DraftKings, Adam, is now highest projected own at 71.4. Scherzer 66.4, giving you the goods here. First day of the season, why not? Garrett Cole 50%, and then on FanDuel to get your take on this, if any of these changes make any difference. Max Scherzer is now the highest, 44%, and wow, Garrett Cole down there at 28%, Kershaw at 26%. So it's a lot different on a one pitcher site, obviously.
Yeah, I think it makes sense for Kershaw's ownership to come up. He's just a really good combination of medium projection and upside.
If you guys haven't checked out SuperDraft yet, use the sign-up code Awesemo10, AWESEMO 10, all one word. When you deposit, you'll get $10 free with your first deposit of $10 or more, or $20 in your account with a deposit of $100 or more. At SuperDraft, there are no salaries. It's all about that multiplier life, right? So Garrett Cole will get exactly what he scores. He has a 1x multiplier. Clayton Kershaw tonight, 1.45 multiplier against the San Francisco Giants. That's pretty significant.
That seems
Johnny
good.
Cueto, what's that?
I said that seems good.
Yeah, it's pretty big. Cueto, 2 times multiplier. So, if there's a way to entice you, getting 2 times the fantasy points isn't the craziest thing in the world. If Cueto goes out there and has 15, Garrett Cole has 28, then it's a better night for Cueto. But you can play anyone, which is what makes it interesting. So you can play anybody. You play the value, you play the top. The top guys aren't going to give you added fantasy points. The cheaper guys on a site like DraftKings or FanDuel will give you the multiplier on SuperDraft. It's a lot of fun to play. I hate reinventing the wheel when it comes to DFS, but I do think they've done it the right way. So if you're heading over there and you haven't done so yet, like I said, just use the sign-up code Awesemo10 to get yourself locked in there. Your first deposit of $10, you get $10 free, or $20 free on your first deposit of $100 or more. Download it in the App Store. Go to superdraft.io. SuperDraft. All right, let's go. So we've got about 13 minutes here. We'll jump into some hitters. Very important that we hit on everything, because on a 2-game slate, you have to. The LA Dodgers, highest run total. I've said that a couple times, but not only that, Adam, they are going up against Johnny Cueto, who most people think is completely washed. And a lot of people think Gabe Kepler's not going to allow him to go out there for more than 4 innings or so, which is also possible. But the Dodgers are going to be a popular team. There's no doubt about that. Pulling up the top stacks tool right now, you've got them at 37% ownership. On DraftKings, that's the highest by 10%. And then on FanDuel, you've got them at 37. That's also the highest by 10%. So they're going to be very popular tonight, and for good reason. What are you doing with them? And if you're crunching, if you're playing 150 lineups, how do you play this?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clearly, the best spot. You have a great team. You're facing the worst pitcher on the slate. We don't have lineups yet, but you should have a lot of left-handed power in Muncy, Bellinger, Seager, and Peterson. You have Mookie Betts added to this lineup. You have Justin Turner, who is a good hitter. Pollock's a good hitter. It's a great Dodgers lineup, and you're going up against a pitcher in Cueto who last season against righties held them to an expected ISO of 0.067. Against lefties, it was 400. If you go back to 2018 to get a little bit bigger sample, 123 expected ISO to righties, 290 to lefties. So you have a pitcher in Cueto who struggles with left-handed power pretty badly. He's not pitching in San Francisco, which is the best hitter's park in baseball. Instead, he's pitching in LA. So it sets up as a phenomenal spot for the Dodgers. I think that they're going to be really popular. Obviously, there's only so much you can do on a slate like this. One thing that I think is interesting is that if you look at the top stack tool, which I accidentally clicked off of, there it is. So you have them at 37% on DraftKings. Is this right? The Giants are higher owned on DraftKings now than the Nats?
That's what it says.
Okay. I thought maybe I was looking at the wrong screen.
Pricing too. I'm just looking at the Giants. Most of them are, it looks like they're cheaper, I would think, collectively. I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, Alex has them with a higher top stack percentage too, for whatever it's worth. But, you have a pretty big gap between the Dodgers and especially the Giants and the Nats. They're 25% higher than the Yankees as well. I think that one thing you can do is to kind of mix and match, especially on DraftKings where home runs are more important than they are on FanDuel. Like on FanDuel, there's a lot more to be said for having sequential guys in your stack because of the runs and RBIs being so important. But on DraftKings, if you can differentiate with your Dodger stack by including like an Austin Barnes or a Kike Hernandez or whoever's sitting at the bottom of the order, AJ Pollock should naturally. AJ Pollock's probably a really, really good tournament play. I don't have his ownership projection specifically in front of me, but when you look at the Dodgers, you have outfielders in Betts, Bellinger, and Peterson. So assuming Bellinger has outfield eligibility, it's going to be tough to get Pollock in the lineups. But going that route and just hoping that you get a low-owned home run is one way you can go. Or you can just go overweight on the lower-owned teams like the Giants and the Nats and hope that the Dodgers just score like 5 runs or something and your team outscores them.
Pollock, 28% on DraftKings, 30% on FanDuel right now.
I'm assuming that's the lowest out of the 4 Dodgers outfielders.
So, yeah, I mentioned this today that the ownership for the Dodgers on FanDuel, and this is, okay, get Max Scherzer out of the way because he's projected for the highest ownership of anyone on the slate. Then, and I'm not just talking for the Dodgers, overall, you have Justin Turner, Corey Seager, Cody Bellinger, Mookie Betts, Jock Peterson, and then Gleyber Torres, Aaron Hicks, so 2 non-Dodgers, and then Max Muncy, AJ Pollock. So that's a lot of Dodger players. There's 7 in the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in the top 10 are Dodger bats.
Yeah, so in general, I guess pretty tough to differentiate with them.
I would say so, yeah. But you're right; they are below. Or Pollock is below quite a few of them. What about on DraftKings? Kershaw is up top, and then Scherzer, Cole. So all pitchers for obvious reasons. Then Justin Turner, Muncy, Gleyber Torres, Betts, Bellinger. Yeah, dude, there's Dodgers ownership tonight's going to be insane. How would you recommend other people, like if you're playing 1 or 3 lineups, how do you recommend going about the Dodgers? I know it's a tough question to answer because they're easily the best team, but try your best. Are you muted? Your mic's not working. I don't hear you. You hear him, Jordan? No, now you're muted. That's kind of weird. Plug it in. You unplug yourself? You're muted. Unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
There we go. You unplugged it, didn't you?
I don't think so.
Oh, all right. Well, we're back in business. Go ahead.
So looking a little bit closer at the top stack tool, one thing that is interesting is that while the Dodgers do have the highest ownership, as you would expect, they're not over-owned in terms of top stack percentage. The stack ownership is actually pretty efficient right now. You have, the Nats at 16% with a 14% top stack percentage. Pretty much the same for the Giants. The Yankees are within a few percentage points. So I think that you could argue that going to the Dodgers is good, even though they're the highest owned team, because they're still not really over-owned, and none of the other teams are really under-owned either. The problem too, or the other problem though, is that you do just kind of start running into raw numbers, especially in large field tournaments, whether they're over-owned or not. If 40% of the field has Dodger stacks, you're still just competing against thousands and thousands of Dodgers lineups. In smaller field tournaments, you probably get a little bit more ownership on the Dodgers because people tend to just play medium projections more. But at the same time, you're competing against less lineups in general. So overall, my strategy typically is to just go to these lower owned teams and hope the Dodgers don't win the slate. But I think that there's a little bit more of an argument than normal for going to the highest owned stack here, just because none of the other stacks are really on their own.
How about the Giants? I know on DraftKings, you're going to have a decent amount of ownership on a couple of these guys. I want to see if it came down. I think it may have. Mauricio Dubon was up there earlier. His ownership's down a bit. Darren Ruff, Slater, Flores, they're all in that 25, 28% range. It makes sense on a slate like this.
Yeah, so you're not really getting leverage with the Giant stack in terms of their collective ownership versus their top stack percentage, but you do still get the other form of leverage that we talked about, where if they have a good game, Clayton Kershaw, if the Giants are like a top 2 stat. Kershaw probably didn't have a good game. So there is some appeal there. But the one thing that makes me still not really that interested, in addition to the fact that right now they're getting ownership, is Kershaw is so cheap at 7,700 that even if the Giants did hit a few home runs off of him, but like their solo shots, you would get a pretty decent performance out of the stack. But Kershaw could still be one of the better 2 pitchers on the slate. So if he were...
Lost you again.
Can you hear me now?
Sure can. I don't know what's going on.
If Kershaw were more expensive, there would be more of an argument for going to the Giants as leverage. But it's just so hard for him to fail at this price that I think it's a little bit less appealing.
And conversely, on FanDuel, he's not that he's not that cheap, but he's also not going to be nearly as high owned as somebody like Max Scherzer. So there's not as much leverage there either. Like if Kershaw was going to be the highest owned pitcher on FanDuel, then and he was still expensive, then there'd be an argument to be had there. But you're right. Now this doesn't say, "Don't Embiid My Status" says the return of Ship My Modem and Lofty D. That's great. But no, look, actually, you know what? We got a couple minutes left. Let's do this. If you had to rank your top stacks tonight, and I'm not just talking about in terms of expected run production, because we all know what the answer would be, at least the top 2. What do you see them be in context to the slate? What teams do you think you like most and can give you the biggest edge? And I'd ask you the same question with hitter or pitchers too.
I think I like the Yankees the most, just a little bit lower owned than the Dodgers, and still giving you all the upside that the Dodgers bring. The problem that you kind of run into with the Giants and the Nats is they just don't have similar power. So you need the Dodgers you basically need the Dodgers not to score, but then you also need the Nats and the Giants to just hit better than they really should. So I think the Yankees stand out to me as the highest upside team that is relatively low owned. So I like going there, I think.
What about pitchers? Are we looking at on DraftKings? We both mentioned Kershaw. It's insane how cheap he is. Do you want to get to a little more Garrett Cole, just knowing that his ownership right now is looking like it's going to be a little bit lower than these other guys? And in the top stack tool, again, we talk about top 2 pitcher probability compared to ownership. He's got a top 2 pitcher probability of 61%, ownership of 52%, which when you look at that, it's actually more appealing than anyone else on this slate. Does that do enough for you? Is Cole worth getting up to here at 52% ownership?
Yeah, I think so. I like it more actually on FanDuel than on DraftKings, because on FanDuel you have Scherzer, Cole, and Kershaw all priced pretty similarly. And you have Scherzer projected to be the top scorer about 1.2 times as often as Cole, but the ownership, he's like 1.6 times higher owned. So I think that's a really good opportunity to just pay a little bit more extra money for Cole, get someone that has the same, just as high a ceiling as Scherzer, and, at lower ownership. It's a little bit tougher on DraftKings because he's just in a different price tier, but I think their hitter pricing is probably soft enough that it won't matter all that much. And he does obviously give you a higher raw point ceiling than Kershaw does.
All right. Hey, hit that thumbs up before you go. Coming up next, we've also got live before lock. It's it's been fun, and we're going to be doing a lot more of this coming up. Basketball starting in 7 days. Live before lock coming up next with Alex Baker and Jake Hari. They're taking you up till that 7:05 start. Probably won't be a ton of breaking news, but we should get those lineups while we're there. And, we got another hour coming up of baseball content. So, Adam, we'll be doing this again pretty soon. We'll be talking basketball, baseball for the next couple of months. And I'm pretty excited for it. Excited to have everybody back in the chat and on the channel as well. So until next time, man, there you go. You pulled an hour on 2 games. Not too tough.
Time flies.